along with Maggie's feelings, I too felt the gratitude for the engagement between Manon and Jacob, and Maggie and Joel, M and J, M and J. How could it be that these two combinations of letters would find each other? It's like, that was in itself magical. But more than that, the way the four of us expose ourselves to each other, the way we talked about life. Because Maggie and I are on the other end of that arc. You know, me in my 80s and Maggie in her 70s, and Jacob and Manon in their 30s. We've already lived through some of that creative cycle over all those years. And so part of the exchange that we had, person to person, was that the questions that they're asking and the life they're going through right now, we've experienced in our own way. And so there was a continuity and an engagement that was so heartwarming that I think it made the collaboration of living together just the most desirable thing. It was, I tell you, every time they left, there was a huge gap in our lives.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Okay, now it's your turn.
My turn. For me, so much about this project was projecting into the future and seeing what it was to be still in love in your 70s and 80s and still be vivacious and vital and sexy and spontaneous and communicative. I don't have so many examples like that in my life. My parents are divorced, and most parents that I do know are no longer together or are very separate. So for me, it was like, how do we get to that point in life where we can still be creative together and still feel a lot of love for one another and continue to grow as individuals but also grow together. And so for me, this whole experience was seeing into the future, into the keyhole of what life could be like and learning from the two of you for the two of us.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful, Manon. That's really lovely.
So, does anyone have any questions? Would anyone like to ask anything? Or else we can happily talk away if now is not the moment. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the language of the film, because it's something that we feel passionate about. What is the extraordinary privilege and challenge of making a documentary not only about a relationship, first and foremost, but about two artists? How do you honour two individual artists and find a documentary film language that fuses them together so that they can be honoured as individuals, but also there's a kind of singularity that hangs the piece of storytelling together? Well, fortunately for us, film is a medium of pictures and sound. Fortunately for us, Maggie and Joel are sound and pictures. So, you know, the visual language of the film was inspired by the photography of Joel. You know, the way that we would frame the shots, sort of, you know, what's going on at the edges of the frame is just as important as what's happening in the middle. And so with this sort of classic street photography eye, we were sort of conscious of the idea of inviting an audience in to really spend time with, you know, within the scenes. When we were doing early test filming and reviewing the footage ourselves, we realized that by keeping the camera still and by having very dynamic frames that were quite wide angle, that there was this feeling of being able to enter the space and look around almost in a theatrical sense, or almost as you can here. You can look at us, you could look at the speakers over there. There's a kind of freedom to meander and wander, and that felt really good to us, and all of that came from the sort of ethos of street photography. Similarly, the gift of Maggie's incredible piano playing sort of not only provides the film with a sort of an emotional pulse as the film moves along, there's a sort of emotional punctuation that we feel represents the journey of Maggie and Joel's relationship through these pieces. But also, once again, the film language built on Maggie's original piano pieces, and Diogo Strauss, the composer of the film, took Maggie's compositions and built them into the language of the film. So we sort of built this incredible and unique language that came straight from the source of Maggie and Joel, which was a wonderful process of learning as we were going, and a real joy of documentary making.
Yeah, and it also allowed us to take a step back. It meant that we could be less involved in the making of it in a way. Because the frames were static on a tripod, we could leave the cameras running and we could walk out of the room, we could disappear. We weren't always there for a lot of the scenes that are in this film. And that was a gift because of the language of what we had set up. And similarly with the sound and the music of it, it was just about embracing who you were as people and being less controlling as creative individuals. What's also really special about this film is that we made a documentary about two artists. Can you imagine being two artists, having other artists make a film about you and having zero control? I mean, it's a scary, scary idea, but here you are. These two people allowed us to do exactly that. And that was very, very special. And we spent a year living with Maggie and Joel, on and off, in Tuscany, in England, in New York. And after the year of filming, we then spent a year editing the film in Copenhagen with our co-producers. And we were in the edit room every day with our editor, Estefan Wagner, and we had the mantra, or a way of being, which was that at the end of each editing day, we would ask the question of, is this Maggie and Joel? And if it wasn't then, if it didn't feel true to who they are as people and the experience of the year, we would go in the next day, we'd chop it all up and start again. So they were our guiding light. It was all about wanting to tell a story that had an emotional resonance, but was also something that Maggie and Joel could watch and stand by and feel like it represented them as people and their experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, Nana. And we knew right from the beginning that we were going to be honoured and respected that way. It's interesting, as you were talking, I just thought of something for the first time. Well, let me back up. I've said this before, but one of the things that was wonderful for me to be living with a famous artist and basically not having my own creativity seen in the way that Joel experienced it. And then suddenly you two come into my life, into our lives, but into my life, and you validate who I am as a creative person. But the really ironic and funny and wonderful thing is that I've always played piano. Of all the creative things I do, playing piano is the one thing that I've never tried to get any recognition for. You know, I always to me there's a freedom about sitting down at the piano and just playing what I feel in the moment and letting it go out into the ether as some sort of spiritual gift to the universe and not having to have it, you know, cemented in some way. And then you come along, and probably the first night that we had dinner together in Tuscany, I sat down and played, and Manon, you were over at that piano in a flash with the recording equipment. And I think how amazing, you know, all these years that I've wanted to be seen as a writer and an artist, and suddenly I'm being seen as a pianist. So the moral of the story being is, to all of you in the audience who have some creative bones, you just have to keep doing all that you're doing, because you just never know when what you do is going to land. So thank you, Manon and Jake, so much for that.
That's so lovely.
Yeah. I'd like to add something to that too. You just stimulated me to think about it. I mean, within any couple's relationship, there are liable to be times when an inequity, a sense of difference between the two processes that people live through can become part of it. And I'm sure in any kind of relationship, even if fame or recognizing someone's abilities as an artist, even if that isn't the question, there are still things that show inequity. You rarely see that as a subject, and that Manon and Jacob saw within our relationship this inequity and was able to make something of this to show everybody, because this is a lesson for all of us to deal with. There are moments when, that difference exists in the couple or in a relationship. And many people who've seen this film so far told us both how important it is to see in the course of our relationship the way we manage this difference. I mean, when Maggie and I met, I was already 30 years as a photographer, and my efforts had grown over that time. And so we entered as equals as people, but ultimately that public recognition was always different. And I just feel that it was so important for you both to recognize that and show that to the world, and show that you can survive that and be in love and go through the difficulties of that human process and still come out as equals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Is there nobody in the audience that has a question? Surely someone has a question. This is your last chance.
Okay, we've got a question.
All right.
Hi, good evening. I just want to say congratulations to both of the directors and, of course, Gerald and Margaret. I wonder how difficult must have been to be part of this and act like if you were in a movie, non-fiction movie. And I wonder how do you make those moments of intimacy? Like I'm just shocked about the scene on the apartment, New York apartment, and the last part of the documentary, and I wonder how you make that moment to be that true. It's awesome. Congratulations for you, for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you should answer that, would you?
I'll start. I think it goes back to the fact that we were living with Maggie and Joel over such a long period of time. By the time that we arrived at that point, where they were feeling that comfortable to be free to express themselves in the way that they did, we had already been living with them for over, half a year, longer. And when you're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with people and you're cohabiting and you're sleeping in the same house, you learn each other's movements, you learn each other's energies. And on that particular day, Jacob and I were out and about in New York we were shooting in the streets of New York, and when we came back to the apartment, there was a tension, and Maggie was very tense. And so we just followed Maggie around until something happened, but we didn't know what was going to happen. This was all about following your instincts. And because of the process of living with Maggie and Joel, we had the freedom to capture anything at any given moment. And our cameras were small, they were Leica cameras, like DSLRs. They're not cinema cameras, they're small. And we had a couple of them, and they were always mic'd up from morning till evening. And we had a couple microphones planted in the houses. And we were able to be fluid. And we sort of disappeared very quickly from your sight, I suppose.
Yeah. You became as filmmakers, you became invisible. You really did. And so for us, and we said right from the beginning that, if you're going to make a love story, you also have to show the not so good stuff, you know, the stuff that we all experience in relationship, otherwise the story doesn't have any real value. Certainly by the time that scene happened, we deeply trusted you. We had forgotten, really, that there were cameras around most of the time. It's true we were mic'd every morning, but then we would go about our lives. And so it never felt, you know, I'm really sort of addressing this to the person who just asked the question, who said at the beginning of the question something about, you know, what it was like to sort of be acting in a film like that. And the reality is that we weren't ever acting. And that's what's so beautiful, is that by Jacob and Manon being so harmonious in our space and really knowing their craft really, really well, they created an environment where we could just live and then they could snatch whatever they wanted.
And as Manon said earlier, sometimes she and Jacob would just leave the space because they had monitors and headphones elsewhere that they could follow what was going on, but they didn't have to be in the presence of the two of us. So we just were ourselves. And by being ourselves, you, the audience, have a chance to really look into the intimacy of a couple's lives. And you know, we lost any concern that we might have had about how we represented ourselves. We just lived.
And we were just collecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's interesting bringing this up at this museum at the closing of your show here, Joel, because you know there's an element of spending all of that time with the Escalonas. You know, you've lived that experience of spending 6 months in the presence of people and sort of being both in amongst it and having a level of invisibility, and it's a kind of dual way of being. And I think that with that kind of approach of being a kind of a gentle presence and a welcome presence, and of course the cameras weren't rolling all the time, the four of us interact and talk, you build a kind of trust and a kind of a new form of naturalism that sort of, there's a kind of new law that gets formed over a little bit of time. So it just made me think, seeing the exhibition today, how pertinent the idea is of being in amongst a very kind of intimate circle of family, where once upon a time you were an outsider, and then you go and you become part of that tribe. And this was also that case, and so a new reality sort of becomes normalized relatively quickly.
Beautiful. Absolutely right, Jane.
Good point, yeah.
Anyone got any questions?
Come on, Selma. There's a question in. Come on.
Miguel, again here. What about the title? Can you describe something about how did you choose the title? Choose trying to strike not to kill each other, which is beautiful. It's a metaphor. How was the process of choosing the title, and what it expresses? If you can describe John, Maggie, and Manon, and Jacob.
Well, you know, as filmmakers, making this film, the sort of the main manifesto was always about returning to the emotional truth, and what better way of titling a piece of work than to go straight to the source material. The film had a holding title for a long time, which felt kind of right but not quite right. And one day we were piecing together that opening sequence and realized that the story sort of concludes with Joel saying this extraordinary thing, which both makes complete sense and is also quite mystifying. And funny and unique and bizarre, and it just felt really right. It felt very Maggie and Joel. And like, you know, we had the idea. It just came right out at us, that quote. like in bold lettering, you know, and we sort of had a quick discussion about it, spoke to our co-producers about it, and then floated the idea as well to Maggie and Joel, and everyone was like, oh yeah, you know, it's been staring us in the face.
Absolutely, and you know, and it is, as you said, Miguel, it is a metaphor really, because all of us, no matter how close we are and how much we love each other, there's an element of all of us that is always a stranger. We never know the other person as much as we'd like to think we do, and actually that maintaining that independence of being a stranger is an important element, but it's also a frightening element. I mean, I'm sure there are many people there who sometimes, you know, you look at your partner and you think, who the hell is this person, you know, and it's usually in a place that you're not very comfortable with, and you actually might like to kill them in that moment. But if you're really in love, then you don't actually kill each other. So I think we're doing pretty good. I think so far we've succeeded, and we might get another 10 years.
Yeah, that's great.
I can say,
Yeah.
I'd like to just add something. I mean, I'm the one who had that flash of inspiration lying on the sand next to Maggie on the first day we spent together, and having a sudden recognition of a kind of clarity between the two of us. And I realized in that split second that I had been waiting all my life to feel that sensation of being with another person whose spaciousness, whose identity was so sharp for me that I just felt that we could go the distance and find a way to always understand each other rather than immediately turn away if there was a difficulty. And I thought that that adventure was possible between two people who could find a way towards living together. And the trust was so great that just came out of me like some kind of magical saying. And here we are. And we haven't killed each other yet. And
There's still time.
there's still time.
I think, just listening to you say all that, both of you saying all that, I think your relationship to me is fearless. You have a fearless relationship. And that is, wow, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That's the only way to go, Manon, isn't it, really? You know that. I mean, if we can't have the courage to be, you know, 100% who we are with the person and people that we love, then, you know, what's it all founded on? You know, we sometimes, you know, say something and we'll look at each other and just say, I just hate you. You know? Because in that moment, you just hate that person that you love, and that's reality. And if you say it out loud, you can have a laugh and it passes.
Yeah.
Unless you're sitting on a in New York having a really long scene.
But that passed.
Or it ended in a laugh.
And that ended in a laugh.
So on that, if nobody else has a really urgent question,
So come on, Doris.
should we say thank you for watching and for being present this evening, and we wish we were there with all of you, but as you can see, we are in spirit. And
Can I ask you one more question?
yes.
Because
Go on.
yes, no, this is an important one given where we are. You're two individual artists who've also collaborated as artists, but this is a film that absolutely honours what it is to have a life pursuit as an artist, but it really comes down to the art of being a human being. When it all gets stripped away, who are we as human beings before we identify in any which way through career or anything else? How does that feel to be able to put that identity out there, not as what you do, but as simply who you are? Because that's what's so moving to people. Is it scary? Is it exposing? Is it freeing? How does it feel to just be as your essence?
I think I haven't really felt scared at all by being this exposed. I did wonder how that particular scene might go down for people, but I felt, you know me well enough by now, Jacob, I'm really into honesty. And I think that for all of us, when we really expose all of who we are without those labels of artist, accountant, plumber, whatever, usually we find that we're acceptable and that nobody actually leaves the room. And so by being our authentic selves, we're further validated. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I'll add my take on it too. We can look in the mirror and see what we look like, but we don't always know how it is we're perceived in public, how we come across. You know, we try to be good or strong or creative or whatever label you want to put on yourself. But to see this film, this particular cut, I think the audience should know that there were over 240 hours of Maggie and Joel being on camera, and you've managed to find the 100 minutes to make this particular film. And so for me, I've had a chance now, 7, 8 times, to watch myself go through our relationship together. And suddenly, I had a more clarifying understanding of characteristics of mine. Some that I enjoy seeing, and some that I think, this needs work. And so to be willing to look at myself as I'm presented to a public and to consider how I might still change while there's time, that's been an incredibly important and mind-expanding experience for me. And I watch the film again and again, and the same places keep coming up, and I think, I must really change myself if I want to live wholly as myself for the rest of my life. So I really thank you both for creating an image of me that allows me to go further in my own development.
Thank you. Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Maggie, Joel.
Thank you, Mike.